And we're live. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ruby from Real Dog Box here with Dr. Tom Lonsdale and Kay Stewart from Feed Real. Welcome, both of you.
Hello.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, night.
Wherever you are.
I am incredibly excited for today's live. It's a bit of a odd time of the day for us to have a live, but that's what happens when the internet allows us to connect in different parts of the world. I'm based in San Diego. Kay, you are in
the Nashville, Tennessee area.
And right now, Dr. Tom, you are in the UK?
I'm in East London, northeast London, in a it's called a holiday home in a caravan park. And we decamped and we've been staying here for the summer. I'll be heading back to Australia next month.
So, all right. Probably a good time of the year to be there. So I asked Dr. Tom to come on to talk about his new book, The Multi-Billion-Dollar Pet Food Fraud, which I'm so excited. Truth be told, I have not opened it yet. It's still very, very fresh, but I'm going to get into it. Very excited to start that read. But for those of you that are just joining in who haven't been on one of our lives before, we like to bring people on that have made a huge influence and difference in the pet food industry, specifically fresh food and canine nutrition. And we're going to go live today, talk about Dr. Tom's new book, talk about some of his previous books, which I'm a huge, huge fan of, and some of our history. And I really want to get into periodontal disease, if we can touch on that a bit.
Very good.
Yep. But for those of you that are joining in, we're going to just be chit-chatting for the next 30 minutes or so. If you have some questions, feel free to drop them in the comments so that we can ask them on your behalf. We have an expert here with us. Very, very lucky to have him here. And if you can't stay for the whole live, drop the comment. We will be repurposing this and posting this live to YouTube as well as Facebook and Instagram and our other social channels. So let's get into it. I want to talk about your book, but I really want to talk about your previous books first. So I've got the old school Work Wonders and Raw Meaty Bones. How far Work Wonders was first, or was it Raw Meaty Bones?
No, the other way around. No, Raw Meaty Bones. That I thought was going to be my first and only book. That was written in between 1997 and year 2000, published in 2001, and I felt that was all that needed to be said. But look, it was plagiarized. It was borrowed from big time by a lot of people and distorted. So I then wrote Work Wonders subsequently, a quick, easy, 120-page easy reader. And then I thought my job was done. But that was not to be. And I'm afraid that things went from bad to worse at that time. There were a lot of people who picked up on the ideas, but then they watered them down, distorted them, plagiarized these things. And so I felt compelled to write the third book, Multi-Billion-Dollar Pet Food Fraud, Hiding in Plain Sight. And that's starting to get some traction. I'm absolutely delighted. We had a team of editors. A lawyer went through it a couple of times. So there you go. So I call them the trilogy, the Raw Meaty Bones trilogy. So that's an overview.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people that I talked to about Real Dog Box and Feed Real and how we got started, many don't know that you were the very first veterinarian that I relied heavily on to learn how to feed real food. Honestly, this Work Wonders book was my Bible, so to say, when we first started transitioning our dog to fresh food. And then it wasn't until later on that Raw Meaty Bones, because it's just a little more in depth, started to put everything into perspective. And I think when I was first starting, it was a bit convoluted, the whole raw feeding thing, right? Like it's a lot of information to take in because we're so accustomed to feeding processed food. Unfortunately, our society in the last couple of decades. Was there a particular event that prompted you to write Raw Meaty Bones initially? Like, how did that come about?
Well, this was information that was growing, and of course, from 1990, okay, prior to 1991, we were learning. In 1991, I blew the whistle along with Brett Muir, and we said this is a shocking state of affairs. You can tell quite readily that these animals are in a horrible state by virtue of the state of their mouths. Blew the whistle, thought people would take account. I thought that was enough to trigger the debate. Alas, it wasn't. Veterinary authorities and the pet food industry and so on just shut down that debate. Right. Okay. That was difficult.
How did
Then,
they shut it down?
well, in the case of the Australian Veterinary Association, we were banned from talking about it in the pages of our journal. Yeah, we were not allowed to talk about oral periodontal disease or diet. They let us run for 18 months back and forth, and I think there are about 12. This was letters only in those days, no email, no Instagram, none of that sort of thing. And then, okay, as it happened, I was invited over to New Zealand to lecture to the students over there. The guy hosting me, Dr. Grant Guilford, who then went on to bigger and better things, but at that time, he said, Tom, you won't realize, but in fact, the pet food industry have really geared up ever since I agitated about periodontal disease, gum disease. And they've got institutes all the way around the world researching this whole problem. And so they did. And they were filling the airwaves with all this bullshit, simultaneously paying huge amounts of money to all the veterinary schools and the veterinary associations, all of whom were churning out junk pet food propaganda. Once you fill the communication channels with bullshit, then there's no room in those channels for the true information. And in any event, they put up the barriers to make sure that we couldn't put anything in there. Simultaneously, the BAFAs came onto the scene. And there's a man called Billinghurst, you probably heard of him, who had born again raw feeders as acolytes. And he encouraged them initially to feed raw meaty bones. But then he sidestepped and moved the whole thing over to, well, actually, that's all a bit difficult and time consuming and troublesome. And well, actually, you don't need to worry too much about that. We've got the minced version to which I've added the right kefir and apple cider vinegar and vegetables and it's all minced up and made easy. And actually, you can buy it from me. So with all these things going on, I felt I had to write the book to try and center this.
Sorry, did you and Billinghurst work together at any point?
Briefly. He came and joined the Raw Meaty Bones lobby. But it didn't last long because he very soon wrote me a letter saying, oh, look, this political stuff is not for me. I need to make a living and I'm going to go off and make my buff, whatever. And that's what he did. So the whole thing was hijacked from the get-go.
Can I ask a question real quick to back up? So you mentioned about the periodontal disease. Can you touch on that a little more so people understand that that's where you started? Like, you notice the mouth of all these dogs. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yes. Okay. Well, that was so important. It's the hallmark of this whole thing. It's look, the tools of trade, the crowning glory of your carnivores is their teeth and gums, and they use their mouths for virtually everything. It's vital they keep in good order. They live to actually pull down their prey and then devour it with all that ripping and tearing and gnawing. that they rip into with such gusto. And by so doing, they keep their teeth clean and their gums healthy. Failing to do that, of course, leads to a septic mouth and the traditional dog's breath that has become part of the vernacular. You know, this is part of the folklore that your dogs and cats will have a shocking, stinky breath. But that shouldn't be, because that's poisonous gases coming off the animals are rotting alive from their gums. And it's said that for humans with periodontal disease at the level that we see in our cats and dogs, it will be the same as an open sore, the area of the palms of both hands, bone deep. Yeah. Right. Except that the dogs and cats have much bigger mouths comparably to our own. Mm-hmm. If you look at a 15-kilo dog, it will have a mouth about twice the size of mine, and I'm 75 kilos. So I'm 5 times heavier, but the dog's got a mouth twice as big. That's huge. And then when you consider that these animals live on average about a fifth as long as we do, everything's speeded up. So they have massive inflammation in their mouths, which has a huge impact. And because their longevity is about a fifth, everything's speeded up. So these animals get real sick real quick. If you catch them early enough, clean the teeth in the early stages, or pull the bad teeth if things are too far gone, and then change the diet, you can resurrect them and they can come back to life again. And people, for puppies and kittens, people are astounded. For old dogs, they say, like a puppy or kitten again. Owners cannot believe what they see before their very eyes. Look, in truth, that's an opportunity to look back and say, well, look, that's how terribly ill they've been all their life. And now they're getting a new break, a new lease on life. Just on that point, and there's a good one. Something pretty important happened the other day. I went to a magazine called Nexus, and I said, hey, we've got this new book out, and would you be kind enough to review it? And I think they're going to review it, and I think you'll be able to see that in the Nexus magazine next month. But they said, oh, and what we're also going to do is publish the article that you wrote in 2007. We're going to republish it because it's the box and dice. It's the whole thing. It's so good and tells the story. Well, I was very pleased to hear these nice words of support. I went back and read it, and there's a line in there that said, we discovered that by pulling the teeth and changing the diet, we could fix difficult or almost impossible conditions. Look, difficult and serious conditions that we'd hitherto been unable to treat. Right. So if we could, for instance, animals with collapsed immune systems, bad livers, really rotten mouth in the case of plasmacytic stomatitis in cats, pododermatitis in cats, really extreme conditions. If the treatment for that was to remove the bad teeth, give them a raw meaty bone diet to keep the remainder of the teeth clean and the gums massaged, these animals would just come back to life miraculously after they'd already been to see 5, 10, 20 other vets without success. Then, therefore, leading off from there, this becomes very, very important indeed, because if that's what you're going to do with the animals that are suffering really severe disease, then you must do the same with those that only have mild disease, and also all those other animals before they get any disease. That's the requirement.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the hallmark. How you do that? Chuck them a raw meaty bone. And again, to start to see the magnitude of this, there's a bloke called Ignaz Semmelweis, and that's a long time ago now. He was a Hungarian physician, discovered that in the maternity ward, if he washed his hands, his patients survived their experience in the maternity ward as opposed to those that didn't. So that was a huge breakthrough. And he thereby was able to save a lot of ladies who gave birth in the ward. Raw meaty bones applies not just to whelping females or cats that are giving birth, it applies to them all. This is the miracle cure. This is the key to the carnivore code. Feed them raw meaty bones, and that's it. But you know what? Mr. and Mrs. Caveman knew that millennia ago.
They did. So is it your thought that if a dog or a cat has been fed raw meaty bones since birth, essentially, since they've been weaned off of their mother's milk, that they will never need a dental cleaning?
Correct. Unless they have really deformed mouths, as do French bulldogs or pugs or Pekingese or some of those, and also those with very long snouts as well. The elongated telocephalics as well.
They're at a bit of a disadvantage because of the way that their mouth is shaped.
Yeah,
that's true. But then the answer then is not less raw meaty bones; it's more ripping and tearing. If they're starting off with a disadvantage, then they've got to do even more. And ordinarily, that's enough to keep them healthy for the extent of their natural life. Not to say they won't have some medical issues and they always suffer accidents, but this is the answer. This is the answer to the surplus of animals and insufficient numbers of vets. Right. Well, if the animals are suddenly healthy, don't worry, the vets can handle it.
Yeah. So you wrote letters to the Australian Veterinary Society about the prevalence of periodontal disease. They wouldn't publish it. They didn't want anyone to know that there was actually an answer to all of this uptick in disease and ailments that they were seeing. At what point did raw food? So when I came out to visit you in Australia, I was so surprised at there being an entire food aisle in the grocery store dedicated to fresh food. That was, it's still probably unheard of in most parts of the US, and now it's becoming a little bit more popular. But back then, I'd already felt that people in Australia had adopted this idea of feeding fresh food. So at some point, your letters, your information, this came across to somebody and it became a little bit more popular. How did that happen?
Okay. Well, in fact, what you were seeing in the supermarket was mince for the most part. So there's been a long history in Australia of people feeding chicken mince, which is ground up chicken frames and so on. And then the big, hard, they call them bowler bones, or you can call them dinosaur bones, or people call them recreational bones. They're very harmful, actually, but they've always been part of the folklore in Australia as well. So the raw meaty bones as such didn't get out. And it's starting to now, would you believe? But again, the bones tend to be in small pieces, which makes them, number one, not as effective at cleaning the teeth and gums and stimulating the brain chemicals and telling the stomach something's coming on the way down, because they're swallowed very quickly. And as a result, there's a risk of them getting stuck. So, look, raw meaty bones are the food and medicine as well. And because they're medicinal, well, you've got to think out how you're managing this, how you're handling it, where you're sourcing the raw meaty bones from, how you're administering them, how often you're going to administer, and so on. There is a bit to it. It's in Work Wonders, of course. It's all set down there. But yeah, back to availability. Again, unfortunately, there's bath mania and bath maniacs everywhere with their minced junk and supplements. And well, I think they belong in the court. I think that probably it's going to come to that. Oh yeah, that's what this new book's all about. This is about getting people into class actions and RICO actions. I don't know if you know RICO over there, racketeering and improper conduct and corrupt organizations that they use to rein in the mobsters. Well, the junk pet food industry and the BARPers fall into that category. because it's to do with a pattern of behavior. And they know they're doing wrong, and yet they keep doing it. And they will till then.
Is your disagreement with the barfers that the food is minced or that there's fruits and vegetables included? All of the above?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I did an AMA last night, and one of the questions inevitably is, should I be including fruits and vegetables in my dog's food? And for years, I remember when I came to your clinic in Bligh Park, it was the first time I'd seen, chest freezers full of lamb heads and just big body parts. And I'm like, what? And you're right. Now that I think about it, in the supermarket, it was primarily ground food or minces. And I remember asking you what you thought the appropriate amount of food to feed was. And you kind of shrugged your shoulders and you're like, the dogs know how much they should be eating. Sort of check it out, get a week's worth of meals, check it out, whatever they eat, whatever's left over they don't eat, bring it back in, store it away. They know how much they should be eating. So you really weren't a fan then of using some sort of calculation to say how much each dog should eat. I didn't put it together back then that you weren't a fan of fruits and vegetables. So is your thought that they just don't belong in the diet at all?
Pretty much. A few table scraps might be all right, just in case a pack of wolves would pull you down. This is way back when we were living in the cave, and you might have finished up on the dinner table for a pack of wolves. They would eat what's in your stomach contents. But that's about all. And also the chyme that's passing on down through your bowel. But really, the vegetables don't really feature. Think of the wolves in the Arctic. I mean, you're up there in North America. You've got big packs of wolves, Yellowstone and above. Mm-hmm. They're not eating fresh strawberries.
But what about the deficient soil that so much of the animals are on?
No,
like the animals that are grazing, and are they getting the right nutrients?
Yeah, of course.
And then passing them on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. They are for you and I. That where do you eat? What animals do you? Better, of course, if you feed lean game animals, but your farm version is adequate for all intents and purposes. One day in the far distant future, people will possibly do longitudinal studies and say this pen of dogs to be fed raw meaty bones, and this to be on whole carcasses complete with fur, feathers, and fins, and we'll see what that difference is. But at the moment, we don't know, and certainly anecdotally, there's no difference. My clients, some got closer to the natural ideal and would feed complete with fur, feathers, and fins, and others would just rely on, I'll tell you this, in the case of little dogs and cats, chicken wings, and in the case of bigger dogs, chicken carcasses. And that was it. Yep. So easy. Now, what are the deficiencies? I don't know. I never saw any difference. I did know that those animals didn't keep coming back to see me with diseases. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, you've been preaching about raw meaty bones for a long, long time. Has anything, your approach to nutrition or health or what should be included in the diet, has that changed at all in these last 20 years?
Well, I think not, because when writing Raw Meaty Bones, I particularly was keen to find out about this vegetable and grass thing, you see. So I contacted my mates in the zoo. I had been a zoo vet, okay. And Pete Litchfield and Neville Buck, they were looking after the carnivores, the large ones, the lions, tigers, and the smaller ones, the desert cats and the fishing cat and the bush dog and Cape hunting dogs. And so they got lots of experience. And I said, right, please tell me, what is it you're feeding these animals and what do they need? And do they eat fruit and vegetables? And do you offer them? Well, yeah, we offer them, but they don't eat it. That was the story there. Right. Okay. So they told me what they did feed. So no, I mean, look, you can't improve on nature. So the closer you cuddle up to nature and try and be good students and listen to what Mother Nature tells us, will get it right. People worry about the percentage of bone. Bone itself is highly nutritious. It's made up of relishing canals full of fats and proteins and all the good stuff, blood vessels and on and on. But if you give a preponderance of that, you will overwhelm the stomach acid. You will therefore create indigestion, and ultimately too much bone will give rise to constipation. So, yeah. But again, the answer is not to stop feeding raw meaty bones. The idea is it's medicinal, and you've got to understand that there's got to be plenty of meat on the bone, meat and sinews, tendons on the bone. So you're going to spend a long time ripping and tearing. They don't woof just bits of broken bone into the stomach, and then the stomach says, "Oh, wait a minute, I don't have enough acid for this." You've got to. They've got to be there for an extended period. And of course, whilst they're ripping and tearing at the raw meaty bones, they're stimulating the brain chemicals. And the brain chemicals, the endorphins, white cells have receptors for those. And so there's communication going on between the mouth and the brain and then the immune system. And this is brought about by the ripping and the tearing. And then the massage of the teeth and gums, again, influences the immune system. Simultaneously, the stomach is told, hey, get ready. There's some stuff, good stuff coming your way. Terrific. So it's alerted. And then the pancreas, similarly. But the pancreas doesn't have much work to do. Because have you ever thought of what happens to a steak if you leave it out on the kitchen bench on a hot day? It dissolves, doesn't it? It's a gooey mess by the time you come back. Why is that? The enzymes in the meat. Right, natural enzymes in the meat that digest the meat. So the same applies when a wolf, a cat, a dog, a lion, a tiger eats the raw meaty bones. They self-dissolve. The pancreas has very little work to do. That's the exocrine pancreas, so it doesn't need much in the way of digestive enzymes. And then simultaneously doesn't need masses of insulin to deal with too much glucose, because there is no glucose.
Right.
No glucose. So no diabetes in cats, for instance, when you do this thing that I suggest.
Sure. Or pancreatitis, which we're seeing so much of for pets that are on. Yep.
on the kibble. I cannot, though, say in all honesty that you will never see pancreatitis. And this has been a concern. The conventional veterinary textbooks tell you that it's to do with a preponderance of fat. But actually, most of the pancreatitis sufferers have been feeding on kibble. So there ain't a preponderance of fat there. So it's a bit of a confused story at this time. But again, if in doubt, give whole carcasses. That's what the zookeeper would do.
Right.
Who are we to do different just because we've got zoos without bars? And we think, oh, well, we can be a bit slack. But anyway, good.
Yeah, I want to get into your new book here in a second, but I'm stuck on something because this is a question that we get all the time. You think having some fruits, veggies, and supplements could potentially be considered a crime. So what is considered complete? And how do you meet that on a mass scale? With these different sort of regulatory authorities and guidelines, whether it's AFCO or FEDIAF or NRC, like how can you address the idea that maybe my dog isn't getting enough? What do I need to include every day in their food?
Okay, well, back to the crime. The crime is not just that they recommend fruit and vegetables and bottle of supplements and so on. It's because it's minced. So they're recommending something inferior and deliberately suppressing what is superior, the pragmatic option, raw meaty bones, or the full Monty of whole carcasses complete with fur, feathers, and fins. That's the gold standard. I say, look, the gold standard is ideal. And if you're a zookeeper and with plenty of money and thought it all out, that's what you're going to do. Your pragmatic option is raw meaty bones. And that's it. That's all you need to do. You don't need to faff around with all these other things. As I've said, there's we've seen no difference whatever between animals fed whole carcasses or raw meaty bones. That's sufficient. And we should start to think in terms of the wolf pack. You see, we tend to talk about nutrition, and then already we're wrong-footing ourselves. We should be talking about feeding. When I wrote an article for the Australian Veterinary Practitioner, and the editor, and his name just escaped me just for the moment. But anyway, he gave the title. He said, what did he call it? Feeding versus nutrition. Have we lost the plot with small animal dietetics? Right, exactly, we have. You know, we shouldn't be talking about nutrition. We should just simply be talking about feeding. And then we should be talking about feeding food and medicine, because this stuff has medicinal functions. So once you're drawn off down this route of complete imbalance and scientifically formulated, these are just English words for bullshit. In fact, do not be drawn onto the junk pet food industry or the BAFA's turf. They've got a product they're going to con you into buying, and they are using words and concepts that should have no significance or meaning for you. So don't get drawn into those anxious moments of, oh, is this complete? Is it balanced? Will my dog die? What deficiency are you trying to tell me it's going to die of? I damned if I know. What? You know, what vitamin, what mineral, what protein, in what proportion? And in any event, nature is terribly forgiving. You see, there's nothing precise about it. Take ourselves as humans. In the Arctic, the Inuits are eating seal blubber, not a vegetable in sight. Well, no, that's because seal blubber contains vitamin C, would you believe? Extraordinary. Right. Okay. But anyway, seal blubber and fish up there, no vegetables. And then travel on down, and the American diet, well, you know what that is. And hospitals are full. But, you know, go over to India, and it's a vegan diet. It's just, if milk is included in the vegan diet, but there you are. And then travel on down to Africa, and it's blood and milk, and anything in between. So this is for humans. For cats and dogs, similarly, you say, oh, well, there's not enough vitamin D. You've got to give liver and whatever. Right. Well, you'll get more vitamin D if you give the liver. But there's enough in raw meaty bones without having to go to a big store of this stuff. Right. It's spread through the carcass. Now, ideally, you see, it's that sort of thing. So raw meaty bones is the answer. And it's a very good idea.
What about liver and other secreting organs?
Did you say secreting organs? You see, this is the BAF talk. This is the plain model talk. It is appalling. So they go blundering straight by the crucial aspect of the ripping and the tearing and the chewing to stimulate the brain chemicals, clean the teeth and gums, tell the stomach something's on the way down, provide the enzymes, and condition the bacteria, the biofilms, and the microbiome in the gut and so on. So ignore all of that. And then what was the thing that you said that they wanted to know? What was that point? I've lost my own thread.
Secreting organs.
Oh, secreting organs. Oh. Why? Why do they insist on that?
Well, I think the idea is if you're feeding whole prey, right, the whole prey, that at some point would be consumed as part of the diet.
Yes, it would. And so, exactly, you might get some chyme, some vegetable matter. You would get a lot of bacteria. You would get some enzymes, but not many, very, very little. But you get plenty of protein. The protein in the guts is the same as the protein in the meat, in the brain, in the other parts that you might be giving. So this precious idea, these are people who And whilst they're rabbiting on about that or being totally insistent, and they're zealots of the first order, they're suppressing raw meaty bones, the nature's perfect food and medicine. And they're filling the airwaves with all this rubbish that they want to talk about. Sure. Ultimately, sheep's guts, I'm going to cough, excuse me. Sheep's guts, cattle guts, pig guts, and so on. They would be a good source of pet food if we could sterilize those things. But of course, as soon as you sterilize them with cooking, then you ruin all the biological benefits. Maybe pressure sterilization of those things might be a way to go in the future. What do they call it? Barrow, not testing, but sterilization anyway, high pressure, and that kills the bacteria. Mm-hmm. You still have putrefaction that goes on with those things. So feeding guts, feeding pancreas, feeding stomach doesn't happen for a whole lot of storage and transportation and legislative reasons. If you're interested in those things and you think that you should supplement and well, feed whole fish, feed rats and mice and guinea pigs and hares and rabbits that you can obtain. Don't skin them, just chuck them on the ground. Mm-hmm. And in the back of Work Wonders, you'll see Hank and Podge fighting over a hare. And they're running, one's chasing the other, and it's so important. Then you and I would think it'd be like eating a carpet, but not for them. They love it.
Yeah, we frequently recommend feeding whole prey. I feed my dog a whole rabbit once a week. I think I'm 100% in agreement with you in terms of the ground food. I think it offers little to no benefit dental wise, and most importantly, the brain gut communication of letting the body know, hey, something's coming down the pipe. Get ready. So that's a big deal. So what's your goal then with your new book? I mean, you've made so many waves talking about raw meaty bones, and I think finally it's starting to become more apparent to a lot of pet owners that there is a natural way of addressing the uptick in disease that we're seeing. But you've got this book, Hiding in Plain Sight, which really is a bit controversial in my opinion. Like what's your goal with it? What do you want to happen?
Okay, well, I want an informed populace. I want people to understand that they've got modified wolves and modified desert predators in their homes. They're sentient creatures. They need to be treated with respect. I've gone back to the archive. I've dug out a whole lot of information that is in Raw Meaty Bones and in Work Wonders, but I've reassembled that. I've added in a couple of articles. One in particular, Raw Meaty Bones Essentials, okay, and also preventative dentistry. Both of those are articles that are on the website, but I thought packaging them between the covers of a book was very important. So there's one place that you find this stuff. Curiously, and in parallel with the Australian Veterinary Association and Mars and Nestle and so trying to muzzle us, simultaneously, there were a couple of good guys at that time in the Centre for Veterinary Education at Sydney University. And one of them, Dr. Douglas Bryden at that time, he's the only vet who ever came out to my practice in all the years. And I twisted his arm, and he was very hostile about that. He didn't like to be told that he had to come out to my practice, but he did. He came early one morning. How long are you going to be here, Dr. Bryden? Oh, half an hour. Came the terse reply. 5 hours later, he staggered out a changed man. He went back to Sydney. He then called me up and he said, look, write all that down for me. And I did. And he published that in the journal, in the Proceedings of Veterinary Dentistry in 1993. It's Appendix D in there. So that is essential information for vets. And any pet owner who's going to the vet next week, they should read that first. That's in Appendix D.
Found it.
In
I opened right to
2018,
it, actually.
okay. And let me just be sure. Anyway, preventative dentistry, and then in 2018, Richard Malik, who was then high up in the Centre for Veterinary Education, he said, "Tom, I know that it's all in your books and so on, but write it down again, will you?" And so I did, and I wrote this article, and that forms the basis of chapter 4. So raw meaty bones essential. So this is absolutely the way we practice, and we told this to all the vets in Australia and in the world, and it's vital information. Okay, and I'll get to. I am answering your question, actually.
Well, now I have like 10 more questions.
What I want to do with this book, I want that to be on the record, because it's been there since 1993. It's been trampled by the Barfords, the prey modelers, the holistics, and all that herd of people who just rushed over it and crushed it and tried to ignore that. So I brought it back to the fore and said, this is central, folks. Then we had an inquiry about junk food in Australia in 2018. 37 of my clients sent in contributions. Some of them absolutely bloody brilliant. You should see the English they use, their phraseology, their heartfelt comments, and it is there. This is eyewitness statements as to what feeding raw meaty bones does. That's it. Forget that you don't have longitudinal studies. Nobody's got longitudinal studies. But, courts of law are forever adjudicating on whether the man stabbed the person or didn't, and rely on eyewitness. My witnesses to what goes on have communicated their experience, and they're telling it for all the world. And they're in Appendix A, B, and C, and scattered through the book. So that's a foundation. A couple of things that we do very differently in our practice, or did, and Dr. May Yam, of course, and I'm going to give a shout out to her because she bought the practice after 18 months of being my understudy and looking at this, and then finally going, whoa, this is so important. Two things, and I put them in the book: how to switch cats from junk food over to the natural food. That's pretty damned important. And also, we've got a fat cat and fat dog guide and what you do to sort that out. Okay, so these are sort of veterinary and animal management facts that I felt needed to be written down, and they're in there. Right. Then I seek to expose the various opportunists and plagiarists and ne'er-do-well people in the universities, in the media, in politics. Chapter 8 is given over to the Barfords and the prey modelers and the holistics. And I mean, the whole book could be filled up with that, but, there's a limit. There's enough information in there for people to see. And then, having assembled all that evidence, we then say, but look, it's gone so awfully horribly wrong in so many different ways. It's a series of parables, actually. And in each one, the people who've got the biggest responsibility commit the worst crimes all the way through. If they're veterinary academics or veterinary formulators of food, or control the communication channels, they do the wrong thing. They do the right thing once, but thereafter they ignore that and do all the wrong things.
Sure.
And then you get up into chapters 11 and 12, and then we're talking about bringing out the legal heavy guns to blast this all out into oblivion, because you've just come through the OxyContin issue over there, and the Sackler family have had to pay billions for deliberately, knowingly poisoning your population and causing immense number of deaths. The same is going on in plain sight with the cats and dogs.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, you ask, well, what's the purpose? In 2018, there was a batch of junk from Mars Corporation called Advanced Dermacare that killed a whole lot of police dogs and sporadically around the country. And so there was a lot of wringing of hands and renting of garments and much angst. Yeah, well, that's just the acute deaths resulting from one batch. And they couldn't find what the chemical was that was included or not included to bring that about. But simultaneously, I say, all of the animals are either slightly ill, middle grade ill, or very ill as a result of the junk food. But there's no other way, because the natural food is ideal. Is this junk, is it superior, better, the same as, or worse than? Of course, it's worse than. And it's worse than in so many different ways. So this is, before our very eyes, the veterinary profession has a responsibility to be hot onto this, and should have been from 1991. And the welfare groups, similarly. But in fact, they're all snouts in the trough, making money out of the ill health and suffering.
How would you describe how veterinary schools are receiving some of this information? And I ask this because Kay and I are just coming off the heels of the AVMA convention, which was
did you go there?
We did. We exhibited there.
Yes, and we talked about fresh food, being fresh food advocates, that if a processed kibble was so good, then we should be eating it too. And I think at the end of the day, in our hearts, even for all the veterinarians that we've spoken to, they're always stuck on this complete and balanced and supplements thing and all of that. But we still hear that they're taught in school to be really afraid of fresh food, and that a lot of the course class requirements when it comes to nutrition aren't really made a big deal of, and that's something that they're on their own to research. Is it any different in Australia, or is this sort of premise of feeding real food accepted now?
No, it's the same the world over. But so you've got a vast population of brainwashed vets with no clue, no idea. In the book, I explained that they just filled with dread at the thought. They've got no idea how to take their right hand and stick it in the freezer and drag out a chicken frame and chuck it on the ground. No, what? They couldn't ever.
But why? I just don't get why these highly intelligent people aren't seeing the logic.
Bigger brain, easier to wash it. I mean, they're in a bad place. They're recruited believing they're going into the ivory tower, and everything in there is supportive of this notion. The whole thing has been hijacked. Look, okay, go further back. All of this came into being because Jack Sprat met up with a fellow called Charles Cruft and decided that in order to sell the meat fibrine dog cakes, that their best strategy was to set up pedigree dog shows.
Right.
And so that's how modern pet ownership came into being. So you basically got mutant wolves with all sorts of genetic defects that give rise to all sorts of genetic problems, being fed poisonous junk out of Jack Sprat's vat made of wheat, beef, blood, and beetroot. So that was a starting point, and the whole thing developed from there. Well, by the time the vets woke up that there were cats and dogs with diseases, it was well established. They woke up because the horses, cattle, and sheep all receded into uneconomic ventures. It was no longer economic to treat the individual cow or sheep or whatever. So they were casting around for more work to do, found the cats and dogs, which are already poisoned, already with shocking rotten mouths. Nobody made the connection between the rotten mouth and the pancreatic disease, the liver, and all the other diseases. There were all these connections not made, but there was money to be made treating these conditions. So that's what they did. And what were they fed? Well, initially, table scraps. But then in Australia, for instance, the Mars Corporation decided, well, that's not good enough because they couldn't make money selling that. So in 66, 67, John Mars got on an aeroplane, flew into Australia, set up a big factory to produce the junk, simultaneously set up a clandestine operation called the Pet Care Information and Advisory Service to brainwash the Australian populace. And they then, with their massive build the communication channels, they had, I think, 600, radio stations throughout the country, and all the regional newspapers and magazines, and then they were into the veterinary schools, and then they were into the politicians, state and local. And they did that for 50 years, telling people why they got to get a pet and why they got to feed it this junk. The vets, they carry a rubber stamp. They go along with whatever the animal owner says. That's what they do when they treat the pig farm. It's 50,000 pigs in crates. The fact that it's hugely cruel and so on, well, never mind. Production matters. So that is the fundamental. And then, because they started off looking at increasing the milk yield from dairy cows, and so they would look at the kilocalories and the metabolizable energy and the whatever, and look at the nutrition aspect of it, not the feeding, the nutrition. So that was their starting point. They then sought to replicate that with cats and dogs, and they started to look at what the contents are, the chemicals. So somebody said, give me a quart of oil, an old tire, and an old boot, and I can formulate a pet food for you. That was how they go about it.
But how do we work around this with the current veterinary population? Like, how do we get them on board? I know our talking points have always been, in the last couple of conferences we've been at, is saying, you have clients that are going to do this. You have clients that are going to feed fresh food. You need to be prepared to talk to these people and support them. That was my biggest talking point. You have people that want to do it. And do you eat off a spreadsheet? And do you eat junk food all the time? We're just trying to do very, very logical questions to them. And most of them don't have answers for me. They're like,
well, they don't, but they don't mind about that because there's safety in numbers, and they just go with the herd. And they've been inculcated with this idea. They have no practical know-how, none whatsoever. And it's all in Pet Food Fraud. It tells you how it all comes about and how they are effectively hamstrung. They don't know which way forward, so they go with what they know. This is the vet on the street. Right. The people higher up have a bigger responsibility, but of course they know the effort it took to climb to the top of the pile, and they're not wishing to relinquish their position, so they're not prepared to do it. So that's why you've got to get them in the court. And so if there are people watching this today, I hope you're going to go out and read the book. It provides you with the indictment, the prosecuting brief. It's all in there. You just take that, take it to your lawyer and say, fine, gather together a couple of hundred other class action plaintiffs, bring an action. Yeah. Then they will have to speak under oath. They can fob you off in the booth at an AVMA conference.
Right.
But don't be lured onto their turf, because if they starting to talk about studies, well, they've got mountains of studies.
Of course.
Right.
Don't argue that with them. Go back to feeding. Don't talk about nutrition and who knows most about taurine or arachidonic acid. You don't know anything about that. These are just noises. What do they mean?
Right.
Don't engage on that level. No. And shove the videos up their nose as well. Go to my YouTube channel and get all the videos and shove them up their noses. Go and see May Yam's introductory video that she put on the front page of the Bligh Park Health Centre webpage. And there she is, and she's saying, look, welcome, here we are, and this is what we do. And we rely on the food and medicine, raw meaty bones. Indeed, you see these animals, they're demonstrating to you. We can learn from them. And this is what we put in these freezers. And it is clear as day what needs to be done. So, arguing with these folks, they don't know. They don't even know that they don't know. And so they're poor, helpless people, actually. They've been absolutely dumbed down and made idiots. Indeed, I try and encourage, at the back, I have a checklist of what veterinary students can do by way of suing their university.
I love that.
Yeah.
I have to find that area.
I did speak with a lot of veterinary students at the conference. There were quite a few there, and those were the ones that I enjoyed talking with the most because they're malleable, they're curious. And so, I just kept pointing everything out. Like, think about this. Think about what we're feeding.
Okay. It's very difficult. And arguing and discussing. And I'm going to give a shout out to Brian Hantman because he spoke to me on LinkedIn the other day, and he said, and I'm listening to your audiobook, and he's just now saying, because these books are available in audiobook, so you can go and get that information and go on a drive across to San Diego from Nashville and listen. Anyway, but it's all very well, but unless they're prepared to unlearn, then they're going to come unstuck.
Yeah, I agree.
A builder worth his salt, anyone who is going to build a house, first of all knows that if you buy the land, you don't just plonk the house down. You clear the land of rubbish. You then dig down and lay foundations before you build your superstructure.
Right.
And that's what they have to do. They have to say, well, if they can't ignore it and chuck it all out, then they nonetheless need to put it in suspense. They have to put it on a shelf and say, well, I'll leave it there for the time being, and I will go right back to basics and start again. And when they do that, then they're with the prospect of creating a secure understanding that will stand the test of time. But trying to get them to bolt on new information. And don't forget, of course, they are also exposed to the BAFAs who are telling you that it's raw, therefore it's natural, therefore it's good. And I call these people the RAW, righteous and wrong. RAW, righteous and wrong. And they are. And they're going to hijack you, and they're going to hold you hostage, and they're going to tell you that this is necessary. And straight away, they've gone blundering past nature's food and medicine, which is whole carcasses reduced down to the pragmatic option, raw meaty bones. And then, go on.
No. There's a question in the audience.
There's the BAFA in the doc. So that's BAFA vet under oath, and he looks a very worried man. And this is Uncle Sam. The government tells you to feed this junk.
They do.
I know.
The government tells you to do that because it doesn't have the bacteria in it, and therefore it's okay.
Yeah, but it's the
wait a
same
minute.
thing that we're seeing in the human processed pet, not pet processed pet food, processed food line. You know, for people, it's the same thing. Fortified calcium in your orange juice or something like that. You know, add on all these extra things because we've stripped them of their value before it got to you.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's appalling. Fortunately, though, no one of us eats out of a single packet at every meal every day for life. So there's the difference there, and that's partly why they can get away with selling bad stuff, because the effects are ameliorated by virtue of feeding other stuff. But you see, we have a fantastic big opportunity. I wrote Raw Meaty Bones. Actually, I don't have a copy just at hand here, because it's written for vets and human doctors, because the last chapter is all about the cybernetic hypothesis and how all this links together, and this produces a new way of thinking, a new medicine, a new understanding. So in truth, once we get this thing to catch light and take off, everyone has the opportunity to run the experiment in their living room.
Mm-hmm.
They've got their sick, fat, junk food fed animal sitting there one day. They chuck it raw meaty bones the next day, and a week later they look at it. They've taken a video, by the way, first off, of what they started with. And at the end of the week, they get another video, or prepared to accept what they see with their naked eye. And suddenly they've run the experiment, and they've seen what that will do, giving food and medicine to their carnivore companion. Then they can say, right, well, I'm not going down to the supermarket no more. I'm going to go to the fruit shop and the butchers and the bakers, and that's going to be where I'm going to get my food from. So we can use this horrible thing that we've done to our pets, where we haven't just fed them McDonald's. We've taken McDonald's equivalent, ground it up, heated it up, extruded it under pressure, put it in a bag, and fed that every day for life.
For years. Yep.
For years and years. That's what we have done. And as you said, the vets insist that that's the appropriate way.
Yeah.
Well, sure, we got a problem. You can try talking to them reasonably, and great. And if they will parlay, then you're in with a chance. But if they won't parlay, get your lawyer to talk to them.
That's going to be a huge undertaking coming from someone with a legal background. Building a class action is not an easy one. Do you have any attorneys that are on board with getting this case started and filed?
I don't. But that's not to say that some can't be found.
Sure. Especially those who have had pets that, you know, suffered from some of these issues.
Right.
All they've got to do is read this book. It's unimpeachable. Look, if they can find something that's wrong or at fault in there, well, I'll be the first to correct it. But they can rely on that. They can go to that. They can go to the videos. They can then do their own research, and then they can find that this is just fine.
Yep.
There is a statement on the website now, open letter to the junk pet foods and the vets, requiring them to demonstrate with longitudinal studies that their stuff is both suitable and safe for long-term consumption. They're obliged to do that. Anything else, you're obliged to, if you bring in some gee whiz wonderful new system, you have to demonstrate that's superior to what it's replacing. They brought this junk in, this worse than McDonald's in kibble form, without ever doing the comparison. Right, well, you better do that, because you've been selling this with false and misleading advertising now for too long. And you've been paying hush money to the universities to shut them up. And so you're a bunch of criminals. And I don't think we can build jails fast enough to accommodate you. So that's my view anyway.
Yeah, no, those are bold statements. I like it. We once tried to go that route, but we weren't very welcomed or accepted, because I think people, here's my honest opinion, I think people don't want to know what they don't know. They'd rather sort of, this is
Skate.
the majority, yeah, just live through life kind of blissfully in ignorance, because knowing means they have to go do something about it and take action. And inherently, most of us are very lazy, so they don't want to do that. But I think there's a lot of value. I have this book, and now that Brian has made the suggestion to listen to the audiobook because you're narrating it, I am definitely going to be downloading that instead. And for those of you that are in our audience, we are doing a giveaway with Dr. Lonsdale here coming very soon, which does include some of his books and some of our DIY workshops where we talk a whole lot about raw meaty bones and making sure that we're including that into the diet. So you guys stay tuned. I have used up pretty much all of our time with my own questions. So I'm sorry for that, but I did want to ask this one from Aaron, which I think is an important one that a lot of people are wondering. 80-10-10, this is the prey model PMR diet that you referenced earlier, has had such great marketing over
the abomination, a complete abomination. There's no animal on the planet, mouse or elephant or anything in between, that is 80-10-10.
Yeah.
It's all written about in chapter 8, where this mob, once they discovered that Bath was an abomination, they thought, but power, prestige, and profit was their big motivator, and they came up with this so-called prey model formula.
But I think she makes a good point here, which is people like having some sort of formula or recipe to follow. Her question is, when it comes to raw meaty bones, how important is it to rotate the species of protein? You talked a lot about chicken carcasses, but I think this is a really valid question for people who are like, you know what, I'm doing away with all the recipes. I'm just going to go out and get carcasses. How important is that rotation of proteins?
We don't know. Plenty of my clients just feed chicken frames. They come and they get 10-kilo bags, one in each hand, and run. They're busy. They take him back, stick him in the freezer, and pull out the chicken frame. This is after the meat and the guts have been removed, and chuck it to the dog. Those animals are just as healthy as those folks who've been rotating, who've been getting turkey necks and sheep's heads and whole fish and so on. So if there is a difference, it's hard to detect on a daily basis. Presumably there is a difference, but how significant that is, I wouldn't like to say. I don't think you should stress. You say, and people like recipes. Well, number one, I'd be saying, stop liking recipes. That's not your friend. 80-10-10, and get your scales out and your measuring cylinder and do all of that stuff. Again, it's in Work Wonders. That's what these people did. They specifically said Work Wonders is a bad book and you've got to listen to us with our formula.
So are you effectively saying that there should be no commercial pet food?
There should be no mince. There should be no manufacturing. There should be no manufacturing. So there's a Raw Feeding Veterinary Society that are then sponsored by a dozen manufacturers of minced meat and vegetables and recipes. But the zookeepers, they have nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah. Here they do. They do, actually.
Yes, I'm sad to say.
Yeah. We went to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. This was 1 month before I went to Australia to see you. And we asked the zookeepers what they were feeding their wolves and felines. And they said mostly raw meaty bones, right? They just chuck over carcasses. But it was very important to them to supplement with Steve's Real Food, I think is the name of the brand, because they didn't want to miss out on any important vitamins and minerals. And I was just like, I don't understand.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the belief in magic. So a big dose of quackery enters into all veterinary and also animal management things as well. I can understand a certain anxiety not to miss out on something because, of course, the animals don't chase their kill, they don't bring it down, they don't eat everything and it's already dead and been frozen and so on. But once you're starting to supplement, then really it bespeaks the idea that you've got to thereabouts an idea what it is that is deficient and to what extent you've got to add something in. Because otherwise it's complete blunderbuss, random approach that really is not going to stand the test. Bearing in mind, again, zookeepers have not been reading my books and don't actually understand the significance of periodontal disease and whatever, and some of those very important things. They don't know about biofilms. They don't know about apoptosis and the fact that programmed cell death. They don't know about the microbiome. A lot of those things they don't know. They should. That's my recommendation. Read the book, find out. But back to Erin's question about rotating. Look, in theory, it's a bloody good idea. I recommend it. I recommend people feed fish because then you cover the fatty acids wonderfully, and you include the guts easily, relatively cheaply. The chicken frames, well, often they've got bits of guts and whatever still inside. Actually, if you fish around in there and if you feed it raw, then that's there. If you've ever been to an abattoir, you know that everything gets covered in excrement. So there's plenty of bacteria on raw meaty bones, rest assured, and to repopulate the bowel with helpful bacteria. So yeah, give them a turkey neck, a fish, a chicken frame, a lamb's head, an oxtail, kangaroo if you can get it. Go out and get some roadkill. There you are in Nashville. You might be able to go out into
get an armadillo.
Get an armadillo. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, so this is doable, and it raises pet owning to a wholly different level. And you see the evident thrill. Why do you think we've got this idea of give a dog, he's like a dog with a bone. He won't give up. He's persistent. Right. Why? Why do they crave to rip and tear and chew at bones? It's absolutely fundamental. Absolutely fundamental. And you yap on about 80-10-10. What? And it's about ingredients. So you're back then down the nutrition road, talking about percentages and content and whatever. Mr. and Mrs. Caveman had no concept along those lines. It was feeding. Pack of wolves at the cave entrance, and you want to feed them, out it goes. Carcass leftovers.
Yep. No, that's I'm with you.
All you got to do.
I agree. I think for the majority of pet owners, there's still a level of practicality that we have to find a middle ground. I don't know what it is quite yet, but the idea of sort of using a spreadsheet and formulating and counting the macro and micronutrients is just it's not natural. It's not feasible. And I hope that it's something that we can start to sort of move away from. Let me make sure I got all of these questions. One last one that we can wrap up with. But before we get to that one, Dr. Lonsdale, where can we find your book?
Thank you. Well, basically, the easy way is to go on to Amazon, and then you can get the paperback, the ebook, or the audio book for each of the three. And I would encourage you to do that. And where you start, I don't know.
Do you recommend reading them in the order that you wrote them? So raw meaty bones?
Not really. Not now. No. I think for pet owners, just to get an understanding and get started, read Work Wonders. Yeah, there it is. 120 pages, easy peasy. And the new the new ebook version, the pictures in the back are actually in color. So we were able to go and find them, even though it was 2005. We found those. So the ebook of Work Wonders is easy peasy. You can listen. You don't listen in color, but you can listen to the audio book narrated by me. If you're listening to this streaming now, you know what I sound like now. And there you go. I don't know if that's a commercial or not, because you may not like the thought of going to listen to me for 27 hours. I'll tell you. This takes 12 hours to listen to. Well, Meaty Bones takes 12 hours, and the other one, Work Wonders, takes 3 hours. So that gives you a clue. There is a co-narrator for the female sections in this, because of the few female sections where clients of mine, and Margaret Thatcher, she gets something to say in here as well. Oh, this is, by the way, your FDA saying no bones. Right.
Yep.
So this is,
I know.
But go to Amazon. You can go to your bookstore. They'll probably have to order it in, and they'll get it from Ingram Spark. So basically, and the other thing, now then, thankfully I've remembered. Dogwise, the dog book publishing company, have a big stock of all three, but they've got this one as well. And I tell you what, it would be very good if people listening to this actually buy the books from Dogwise, because they're competing with Amazon, and it must be very difficult out there trying to compete with the mega behemoth Amazon. So Dogwise up in Wenatchee in Washington State, they've always had the first two, and they've got this now as well. And audio books, you can get them from my website too. But that's probably more information that people can take in. Amazon and Dogwise.
Perfect. Well, I've shared the link here for those of you that are interested in giving these books a listen or a read. I highly recommend it. Again, I've had these for years. I actually had a former employee that took this from me, and I had to fight. I threatened a lawsuit for her to get it back to me, but I got it back. I am so thankful for you to take the time to come on to tell us about your new book, to share your knowledge about disease and some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that people don't want to talk about. They don't want to hear about it. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's been fantastic. And look forward to chatting again.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you later, and make sure to keep a lookout for our giveaway. That'll be coming here in a couple of days here on Facebook. And if you are coming to our Feed Real Summit ticket, make sure you grab a hold of those raffle tickets today. Bye, guys.